Welcome to In Your Defense, Galveston and Beyond.
Hello and welcome to Defense on the Coast with Mark Diaz, a passionate criminal defense attorney with over 25 years of experience defending the rights of Texans. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and I'm excited to discuss all things criminal defense law today. Mark, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so this episode I'm calling Texas Takedown, Understanding Search and Seizure Laws in Drug Cases. Are you ready for this one?
I am.
How have you seen drug laws and enforcement change over the years in Texas?
Well, that's easy. Obviously, the big one is marijuana and the attitude that's still developing over marijuana.
It's still illegal in Texas, right?
It's still illegal. Recently, I was in federal court on a client who had been charged with trafficking thousands of pounds into the United States from Mexico. It was odd because I'm sitting here thinking this guy could be in the federal penitentiary long enough that weed becomes legal. Marijuana is the biggest one. Everything else is certain things will be a hot button. For a while, it was cocaine.
Right.
Methamphetamine took over cocaine, and now it's fentanyl, right? Fentanyl is currently one of the harshest punishments we get in both state and federal court. I don't know if something will replace that someday. And I don't know if the marijuana movement keeps going the way it does, is it then going to start affecting other drugs in the future? And I don't have the answer for that, obviously. The biggest change is marijuana.
Here in Colorado, we've seen changes with mushrooms, with psychedelics as well. That's been a thing that's happened here.
I've read about it. Mushrooms haven't been a big thing here in Galveston, so I've not had many mushroom cases, but I am familiar with what you're talking about. And I've read a lot of stuff on people microdosing with them.
Right.
And that's where the changes are mostly coming that I read about. There's not been a big prosecution movement here on mushrooms.
Okay. Can you explain the basics of search and seizure laws as they pertain to drug cases in Texas?
If you're in a vehicle, it's one thing, right? And then it's one thing if you're the driver versus the passenger. It's one thing if anything is in plain view. A lot of times officers will articulate that they smelled marijuana as a basis to get to a search. Sometimes we're able to attack those when no marijuana is found, but let's say another substance is. How could he have smelled marijuana if there was no marijuana in the vehicle? That type of deal. Right. So your rights in your vehicle, though, are going to be less protective of your rights in your home, for example. And your home, they're going to, most of the time, to get into your home, it's going to need a search warrant, which is going to require some judicial activity and an officer going to court and swearing to a judge of why they should give them a search warrant to your home. That is not the case with vehicles, right? And vehicles also become more troublesome because we have drug dogs, drug sniffing dogs. There can be issues with how long they detain you waiting for the drug dog to get there. There can be issues with, did they let the dog, for instance, stick its head inside the window? That's different than the dog doing a walk around and alerting from outside. So when you say, can I give you the basics, it's hard because it's different in any situation. It's also different if you're just walking down the street and you encounter law enforcement. What's that going to be for, right? Why was there an initial contact? I have to start there. But then how did they discover the tiny bag of cocaine in your pocket, right? They're allowed to frisk you for weapons and touch you, but the officer's not going to be able to articulate that little baggie of cocaine felt like a weapon. So in each possession case, my circumstances are going to be different. So the way that I challenge the search there's no boilerplate way. I can't say that we're always going to challenge this way because it depends on the circumstances under which the person was arrested.
What are some of the I don't know, the situations that you've come across that you look at that kind of makes your head tilt a little bit as far as, an illegal, but you think the search might have been illegal? Like what are some examples of things that trigger that for you, that it wasn't done right?
You're talking 25 years. I can
just a couple, Mark, just a couple.
The pocket frisk is one that's happened, meaning the officer said he was just patting my client down for guns, and then he had a little baggie of cocaine. Well, the officer didn't have the legal right to go in his pocket. There's no way you could have felt that little bag on an exterior pat. The drug sniffing dogs sticking their head inside the car. But in the case I'm talking about, the officer actually opened the door to the vehicle. That was ultimately determined not to be legal. I've had a case with a female passenger's purse, and she did not give consent to the officer to go into her purse. I could just go on and on. I mean, I have found where officers have applied for search warrants. We have been able to show that some of the things they articulated in their request for the search warrant were false, and therefore the search warrant should have not been issued. It was misrepresented to the court, so we were able to get that case dismissed. Big one is informants, but not law enforcement informants, meaning defendant trying to work off a case or working with the police for whatever reason, also misrepresenting to the officer what happened. I had a really good trial case one time where the officer involved claimed to have done purchases from my client's residence and claimed that he had a confidential informant doing so. And then I discovered that. So typically when law enforcement does undercover buys, everything is documented. So if they're going to buy $1,000 worth of something, pictures of the actual bills with their serial numbers are documented, photoed, everything. Then they send the person in to do a buy, come back out, document the drugs, then go arrest the guy, find the money, say, we can prove this was our money. Well, I had a case where the officer said all that happened and then discovered that none of it did. None of it was documented. None of the dope was collected. There was no money documented. And so that made that search illegal.
Well, what are the implications of an illegal search for a drug case? Is it just an automatic throw out? Probably not. Or it is.
Yes, because the state can't benefit from the fruit of the poisonous tree. If it was obtained illegally, it's not coming in as evidence, right? Mm-hmm. And if the evidence is dope, then it's gone.
Yeah.
So the case is gone.
That makes sense. Yeah. What challenges do you face when contesting the legality of a search in drug cases?
A lot of times, the biggest challenge is the judge. There are some judges who are very reluctant to suppress evidence unless they have no other choice. It could be because judges are elected and they don't want to upset police agencies. It could be any number of things, but sometimes the biggest challenge could be the court that you're in. A lot of times, though, especially on the ones that are documented. When I say documented, usually I'm talking about on body cam, where the officer said something in his report or in his probable cause affidavit that was so different from what really happened. Generally, when that happens and we have a good prosecutor, they'll agree with us and let it go.
Do you have any specific strategies that you employ to challenge unlawful searches?
It would depend on the way that it happened. Up until recently, we had an issue here in Galveston County. We have a task force, right? They do warrant roundups and they do search warrants. Once someone has gotten a search warrant from a judge, sometimes they would ask the task force to go do it. And the task force is what it sounds like. It's a bunch of super trained guys carrying, body armor, assault weapons, the whole 9 yards. We had an issue for a long time here of that unit not wearing body cams. Their justification for not wearing body cams was always, well, we don't want our tactical information getting out there so that suspects can see what we do, before we go do a takedown. And that worked for a long time. But I guess between the defense bar using that against them in trial, right, in front of juries, and probably just as we become more transparent as a society, even that has changed, and now they're wearing. Because the challenge we had back then was they have nothing on camera. And, I had a case where my guy was charged with assaulting one of the officers, and it was his word versus the officers. Nobody had a camera on. Those types of deals were very challenging because no one's going to take, well, not no one, but it's harder to take the word of an accused criminal than it is a police officer.
Sure. Right?
We're all taught from when we're children that the police are good and, listen to the police. And if you need help, call the police. And, so we start out with an inherent good feeling about police, right? Especially the jurors. But as transparency is coming more and more into play, it helps. It helps both sides, really. I mean, obviously it makes the defense of some some cases more difficult. But you'd be surprised how often we find that the camera does not reflect what the officer put in his report. And sometimes I know what the reason is. It's because they're just cutting and pasting reports rather than starting over from scratch. And then they forget to take something out, or they say, well, this one was just like the last one. That's just laziness, right? But every human is guilty of that at some point. We have caught some where I truly think the officer was pissed off at my guy and just wanted him to go to jail. And that's unfortunate. We ultimately got it dismissed, but my guy spent at least that night in jail till his family could get him out on bond. But from what I could tell, it was just because the officer didn't like his attitude. But so they help and they hurt, right?
Yeah. You know, I feel like a lot of people aren't super familiar with their rights. What should the public know about their rights regarding search and seizure, especially in drug-related situations?
In any situation, you have the right to remain silent. That's it. Remember that one. So many of my clients hurt themselves by talking to the police, oversharing, and they think they can talk themselves out of it, and they actually talk themselves into it. I have a really funny case. My client, so he had been a client before. They put him in the back of a police car, and an officer comes up and opens the door and says, hey, you going to talk to us? He said, call my lawyer. And then officer shuts the door. Another officer comes up, opens the door, says, you going to talk to us? He said, call my lawyer, Mark Diaz. I got his cell phone is on my phone. Give me my phone. This literally happened about 6 times with 5 different officers, and they still tried to question it. So I ended up getting that case dismissed because what they were doing was each one was trying to make an end run around the last one, right? Until they could get him to talk. And he never did. Of course, they still arrested him, but it was all on body cam and I was watching it. And obviously I was laughing because once he gets to the point where he's saying my name, they can't deny that he was properly invoking his right to counsel.
Right.
You know what I mean? But even then, like I had to sit down, go through the body cams, identify which officer's camera at which time, and then point it out to the state and say, look, here he just asked for a lawyer. At 7 minutes and 22 seconds, he says my name. You know, I had to line it all out so they would go sit down and see what I was talking about. So yeah, the biggest thing you need to know is you have the right to remain silent. 9 times out of 10, you're not going to talk yourself out of going to jail. Being respectful and saying, I'm going to invoke my right to remain silent, or I want my lawyer, it's not going to make anything any worse.
Right.
But if you talk, I promise it's not going to be good. People call her all the time and say, hey, this officer called me and wants me to come in and talk to him. And my answer is always the same. If he had enough evidence to arrest you, he would. Don't go in and talk to him. All he's trying to do is get you to hurt yourself. I said, don't go. I said, respectfully tell him, I talked to my lawyer and he told me not to talk to you. Just be respectful, but remain silent.
Yeah, you don't have to be confrontational about it. You know, like we see in the movies, you know, where, you know, there's a big to-do about it for dramatic purposes, but you just have to be real respectful and short and simple, right?
Well, and the other problem is, depending upon where it is and where we get, you know, the court or the jury could hold that against you for being that way. Like we used to tell people, instead of saying don't get convicted of drinking and driving or driving while intoxicated, we would say make sure you don't get convicted for driving while asshole, because they hold it against you. And you know, like I said before, you know, we're taught to respect authority, right? And be compliant. And so when you're exactly the opposite and you're combative, no one in the legal system likes to see that, right? Not the judge, not the jury, especially not the prosecutor. So yeah, I always recommend being respectful, but just respectfully say I'm exercising my right to remain silent.
I think that's good advice for everybody. Well, thank you for joining us on Defense on the Coast with Texas criminal defense attorney Mark Diaz. To connect with Mark, you can visit texascriminaljustice.com. Also, please like and subscribe our channel and leave a review if you enjoyed what you heard. Mark, always great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me again.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.